Well, one look at my title and I know I've offended most viewers. Let me explain. Clearly, inflation is a huge problem for households, for business, for government budgets, and of course, for monetary policymakers. Famed economist Arthur Okun created the Misery Index. It has just two elements, and inflation is one of them. Moreover, inflation is arguably worst in the beginning when prices are outpacing incomes, putting the bite on real purchasing power. The second quarter gap last year in Canada between consumer price inflation and the rate of hourly wage increases spiked at over 8%, meaning at the time households were far poorer. For businesses, the bite is more like a chomp, given the 9 to 10% average increases in input costs that we saw in the middle of last year and the bottom line results that were published at the same time. Worse still, this inflation was a beast that was considered long dead and is now resurrected and wreaking havoc. So if inflation isn't really the problem, then what is? Well, let's get to it. First and foremost, central banks will win this one. Although it has been decades since they last conquered inflation, their playbook is well rehearsed in previous cycles and it is not outdated. They have the tools to continue tightening, not just until inflation itself is subdued, but more significantly until inflationary expectations are completely quelled. If so, today's inflation is temporary, and the only real debate is how temporary. But that's the key to the problem. Inflation might soon be mastered, but at what cost? Economies everywhere will react negatively, and indeed are already showing signs of recession, or at the very least, slowdown. That's a scary prospect, given that it can take up to 18 months for an interest rate change to impact the real economy. Given the timing of increases to date, there's a lot more weakness in store. It won't hit every economy the same. Thankfully, the bulk of the world's driver economies have ample evidence of pent-up spending pressure. Rate hikes in those fortunate zones are actually accommodating growth. Canada has some pent-up spending in reserve, but our runway here is a lot shorter. Here, housing markets have been redlining for years. Debt-to-income levels are sky high, and the average household's wealth is heavily dependent on the value of the principal dwelling. Add to that the instant debt sensitivity of the larger variable rate mortgage cohort, the shock for those who opt to lock in at a higher rate, and the ultimate impact of rate resets when current mortgage contracts expire. Well, given this backdrop, at least 60 to 70% of our gross domestic product is highly sensitive to interest rate hikes. It gets more somber. Soft landings are as tricky to achieve as they are desirable. Put more directly, monetary authorities have been known to overdo it. We can hardly blame them. Monetary policy is a blunt tool at best, and perfect outcomes usually require a lot of luck. Moreover, cracking the psychology of inflation almost dictates monetary overreach, especially after a lengthy phase of well-behaved prices. Now, math is also a problem. The most quoted up to the minute inflation numbers are in actual fact quite dated, and the inflation fix can actually be in long before consumers or businesses realize it. That's because we use this month's prices compared with those a whole year earlier. We tend to do it this way for good reasons. The numbers are easy to understand and useful for compensation adjustments and a whole array of other pricing decisions. The trouble is that monthly price behavior can be well in line with inflation targets, or even under those targets, long before it shows up in the headline numbers. In fact, it can take a full 12 months until that becomes clear, and at that point, it's almost always far too late for the economy. I'll take 1991 as an example. Amid monetary tightening here in Canada, the new year brought in the new goods and services tax, which automatically added 7% to the cost of most goods and services. Well, not surprisingly, when the January Consumer Price Index was released, the prices jumped instantly to 6.9% year over year. Now, fearing a rekindling of higher price expectations, the central bank went to work. Again, by the end of the year, year-over-year increases in the Consumer Price Index were down to 3.8%, and core price growth was just 2.9%. Now that sounds like success, right? Wrong. When we arrived into 1992, the GST was fully embedded. That is, the year-to-year change disappeared. 1 year of a new tax, boom, it gets out of the system. Now in monthly terms, prices were deflating. In January 1992, yearly price growth fell to 1.8%, and by mid-year, all items inflation was just 1.1%. Well, suddenly worry shifted to possible disinflation or even worse, deflation. Now, while a new national sales tax isn't a worry this time in Canada, the dynamic is still the same. It doesn't get much airplay, but on a monthly basis, core price growth has been slowing rapidly from the double-digit level in May of 2022 down to low single digits by the end of the year. Now, this is a remarkable shift given that we are only at month 9 of interest rate tightening. Allow time for the full effects to take hold, and unfortunately, we could be back to 1992. But we say, we got through it then. Won't this time be the same? Not necessarily. Disinflation and deflation are much trickier beasts. The central bank playbook on those is far less clear than for inflation. Just ask Japan, where disinflation and deflation are decades-long mysteries. Human behavior causes deflation to persist. If prices are going to be lower tomorrow, well, why buy today? Or for that matter, why buy at all, unless you simply have to? Well, in this way, deflation leads to further deflation. So can we escape the deflationary trap? Well, that largely depends on the state of fundamental demand. If the economy is indeed overstretched, consumers can delay purchases for a lot longer than usual, and that actually abets the malaise. That makes it last longer. Businesses that depend on domestic demand will feel the pinch. If there's a glimmer of hope, it's likely in the export sector. Stronger fundamentals in the United States and elsewhere suggest that external markets will be more resilient. And of course, those are the ones that we sell into. Ultimately, inflation's not the main problem. It's the reaction to the remedy for inflation that will tell the tale. That reaction won't be the same in all countries. And Canada's weak fundamentals suggest that there will be a more acute negative response here. Until next week, I'm Peter Hall.